Good topic selection, Soren.
Yeah, good topic selection. So we're here to talk about political divide, and we're here to talk about compassion, and we're here to talk about the cycle of politics, which is one of my favorite conversations. And why I kind of decided this conversation or asked David to join this conversation is, like most of you, I pay a lot of attention to politics, particularly the presidential race that's going on, because I feel like it's an extremely important race that what we choose this next cycle. And at the same time, there's a division in our culture and discord in our culture that no matter who wins, they will most likely inherit a very divided culture where nothing can happen. And that as long as Republicans and Democrats think so negatively about each other, I worry about the state of our country. So while I worry about the election, the presidential election of this year, I also greatly worry about the divide that has happened in our culture. And so one of the things I shared with you is reading an article recently that in the 60s, 4% of the people said they would have a problem if their son or daughter married somebody from a different political party. So if you're a Republican or Democrat, 4% of the people said, I would have a problem if my son or daughter would marry somebody from a different political party. Now that number is 40%. 40% of the population, and actually more Democrats than Republicans in that 40%, I should note, I would have an issue with my son or daughter. So there's something that's happened in our culture over a number of years where there's this level of animosity, and so I want to be able to explore that because it feels really important. And potentially if we could address the animosity and the division and the lack of compassion, that also might allow us to vote in different leaders that are an expression of unity rather than an expression of division. Right now, it feels like who we seem to vote for currently seems to be people who divide us the most. And I want to shift that. So we're probably not going to completely figure that out in the next 25 minutes, but I would love to get your best thoughts on that. And where is that coming from? How do we respond to that? What is it like, particularly when it feels like the other side is being so mean and so vicious towards my side? It seems like I'm only justified to respond in kind, and yet I also know responding in kind creates this tension and this division that is not helpful. So any thoughts on where this division is coming from and how we respond to it?
So many thoughts. October of 2016, I get called up to the president's office. And no matter how many times—
You're in the White House.
I'm in the White House. My colleague comes in and says, David, the boss wants to see you. Always felt as if I was being called to the principal's office. Mm-hmm. Never know what it's going to be, what did I do, etc. On this day when he began to talk about the post-presidency, the thing that stuck with me the most was what he defined as the existential threat to the country right now. Mm. Climate is a hugely important and existential issue. Income inequality, racial divide, the quickening pace of information, how we consume it, poverty, injustice, you name it, are big monumental things. The thing he highlighted was, he used the phrase, our civic fabric is ripping.
Wow. This is before the election. We didn't know who would be president at that time.
Exactly. So this is a month before the election. And what we had seen over 8 years was little by little by little, all of the political debates, both in Washington and then throughout the country, had a different tone, had a different tenor to them. The statistic that you gave, Soren, about 40%, the thing about that one is that the intensity will shift depending upon who is elected president. Mm-hmm. And so when there's a Democrat that's elected president, it'll spike with Republicans. When there is a Republican elected president, it will spike with Democrats, which is one of the reasons why this is an important thing for all of us to work on, And the people in this room, given the focus on meditation and wisdom and compassion, need to be part of the solution. Because let me paint a picture. Unfortunately, I am retired from politics, and so I can now take, as my 14-year-old says, the old guy view of so sweet.
With such love.
Such love. So at some point, there will be a Democratic nominee for president.
Yeah.
Right? And then from the period of June or July through November, the two political parties and their allies will spend $3 to $4 billion focused on a couple of million people in 6 states. And when they think about those 6 states and the couple of million people in those places, it's about 8 to 10% of the electorate that in one way, shape, or form they're going to try to persuade or to drive up turnout on their base. Right? So from a strategic perspective, I want everybody to imagine you see the map, you look at the different states, you have the voter file, and you're able to say, okay, here are our targets. Little language, targets. So then what both parties do is that they have their opinion researchers begin to probe what is the issue or set of issues that either persuades someone or makes someone angry from a turnout perspective. Ads are then created. The ads then are delivered either on TV or online or in mail or on radio. And 80% of what you're going to see is not going to be a testament to the virtue of either candidate or the parties. It's going to be an indictment, not just on a policy position, but on how they are the enemy.
Lock her up would be an example of that, yeah.
Right. All in service of saying, and you can step back and rationalize that I will run this piece of content knowing that it is negative and aggressive. It may even push the bounds, but the threat of losing means that I will justify this. Okay, someone is going to win.
Yeah.
Let's assume that a Democrat wins. On the day after the Democrat is inaugurated as president of the United States, all of the anger and intensity that you are seeing right now among Democrats shifts similar to what we saw in January of 2009, and we have been seeing consistently. So we are in this place where the other statistic for you to think about, and everybody in the audience to think about, in the 1970s when you asked, do you trust your neighbor to do the right thing? 60% of Americans said, I do. When that question was asked in 2017, that number was down to 28%.
Wow.
So beyond Democrat, beyond Republican, essentially what you are seeing is a fissure that's complicated because it falls along 3 aspects of identity. The strategists and the pundits on election night will say, college whites versus non-college whites, targets. African Americans, 65 and older, 29 years old and younger. Hispanic, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, religiosity, all of these slicing and dicing of different targets, each of whom is going to receive very, very different messages that pull people apart. So the 3 areas right now of identity that are very different in our politics are, you can begin to divide the parties based upon religiosity. You can begin to now increasingly divide the parties based upon race. And you can begin to divide the parties based upon essentially region in a way that is very, very different. And the danger of certainly the first 2 elements, and even education, that once you begin to divide based on religiosity and race, there's a marker of purity there that seeps into the politics in a way that's very, very dangerous. And so for me, when I think about this moment in time, yes, partisans and elections on both sides will focus on winning elections because outcomes are important. But the work of building democracy
Yeah.
is much deeper
Yeah.
than simply doing the minimum of going out to vote. That's the work of compassion. And to say to someone, and I am guilty of this as the next person is, there were moments, even when I was serving, where if I knew I was going to be meeting with a Republican, I would begin to assume and construct entire stories about what this person's motives were. Without knowing who the person was, without even knowing what they wanted to talk about. I'd constructed an entire elegant artifice about who they were, and Soren, I presented that way.
Right. Right.
As did he.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so this is why when I think about our democratic experience in the experiment in the United States, this is the most important issue
Yeah. Yeah.
in figuring it out.
So how do you shift it when if I create a negative story about the other, I tend to get more voter turnout, I tend to get more campaign donations, I tend to get more activity. The stronger I create this negative story of the other, I tend to win on certain areas. What's the motivation for not doing that? Is there another path? Or is this just kind of part of what democracy has to figure out?
Someone I used to work for before I joined President Obama was the governor of Massachusetts, a man named Deval Patrick. And Governor Patrick said, and I'll never forget this, he said to the team, leaders, not just political leaders, lead in two ways: by having people turn to each other or on each other. They are both effective. And the reason they're both effective is that inherent in each and every person, you and me and everyone here, is we have as much capacity to be triggered by fear as we have the capacity to be triggered or animated by aspiration or hope or a sense of something bigger than who we are. There was a moment in 2008 on election night, in the week leading up to the election between Senator McCain and Senator Obama, when you looked at all the polls, and it's crazy where we are. 2/3 of voters, Democrat and Republican, had favorable opinions of both candidates.
Wow.
Barack Obama and John McCain had 60% approval ratings, favorability ratings, the week before the election.
They both did?
Both.
Across the parties?
It was certainly higher
Sure.
for the partisans, but it wasn't
Right.
on the election day, same time in 2016.
Wow.
Candidate Trump and candidate Clinton had, with undecided voters, what's called a negative favorability ratio of -40.
Wow.
It wasn't that they were even disliked. I had never seen anything like that. And the thing that gives me hope is, and I assume folks in the room will remember whether you thought it was a good thing or a bad thing, but on the night Obama was elected president in 2008, the image of he and Mrs. Obama and the girls walking onto the stage at the first time with a couple of million people in Chicago, and then the images around the world, I'll never forget that. But the thing that was more powerful was Senator McCain in Phoenix that night. Right? And think about this moment. Serve your country. You spend 5 years in conditions that most people can't even begin to imagine.
When he was a Vietnam prisoner of war.
Yes.
Yeah.
Comes back, serves his country, is elected to office, and is close to becoming the president of the United States. A few hours before, it becomes apparent he's not going to be. So now he has to go out in front of the world and give a concession speech, right? John McCain on that night paused and said how proud he was at that moment to be an American, because the election of Barack Obama and what it said about who we are as a people was a moment of profound pride as an American.
He took pride as an American, the fact that he lost and Obama won. Wow.
Right? At that moment, about what it said about us.
Wow.
Right? That's in people.
Yeah.
And I do believe that it requires moments of leadership where, imagine Senator Moynihan from New York used to be famous when he would debate people. And he would confound his Republican opponent he would get a question and he would say to his opponent, that policy idea that you had on education is really smart. And his opponent would be like confused. And then he'd say, and so when I win, I want to adopt it, but there is, this is beautiful to watch. But there is a path there that I think leadership requires, and you see it at the state level in many instances, as opposed to the presidential level. But so
it feels though sometimes it feels wrong. It feels wrong to compliment somebody who seems to be attacking you, right? Like there's so much meanness that feels like within the political dimension sometimes. And I understand that people will feel attacked. I actually think President Trump feels attacked a lot of the time.
Yes.
He's attacked by the fake news, attacked by whatever. I think he's actually legitimately in his world, feeling attacked. Democrats are also feeling attacked. So we have two populations of people who are feeling attacked and who therefore feel justified in responding. And it feels like that momentum gets built. And the John McCains of our time are harder to find. Yes. And how do we cultivate the John McCains of the world? And maybe that's part of the work of the Obama Foundation, is looking at the long game, is let's cultivate the John McCains and the Michelle and Barack Obamas of the world and slowly build them up to leadership. And at the same time, we have to realize, though, that somehow we have the challenges we have for a reason. This is an expression of something, right? And this is here for us to learn from. And how do we get those learnings and move forward?
So this is the challenge for us here, but as I said, this is why this audience is uniquely positioned to do something about it. My being a Democrat is not my identity. It is not all I am.
Yes.
I am the son of two immigrants. I am the husband of my high school sweetheart. I am the father of two amazing young women. I am part of a team that's trying to build civic engagement throughout the country. I am a Boston Red Sox fan. Lots of love in this room. I am someone who was raised in the Catholic faith, and it's still an important part of the way I view justice in the world. I am all those things and many different things, and one of the interesting things about the practice for me is...
The mindfulness practice?
My mindfulness practice is... if I'm having a conversation with my dad, in some ways there's a flexibility of the moment and an openness rather than a rigid view of simply in that moment being back in essentially the limitations or of whatever that father-son relationship was, the same arguments, the same fights, right?
Right.
There's an openness there.
Right.
All of us can bring that into a political discussion. And so the challenge for the country over the course of the next 8 months, when you see the ad understand what they're trying to do. When you engage in a political discussion, before you respond, before you get into the talking point and the rebuttal, that's what we've been doing for the past day. It is that very difficult deep breath. And rather than getting into the argument, how about finding something that may resonate? Something. Say, I hear you when you say that. Say more about that. Or, if you truly don't understand, just ask those questions, but not in a judgy or prosecutorial way, because an amazing thing happens between and among people. All of a sudden, when you don't feel like you're being attacked, it gives you an openness to engage with people.
Yeah.
No one has ever been persuaded in politics or otherwise to change their opinion by being told they're wrong or an idiot. I have tried. And so you see these, and you see and it's really not even a debate. It's like world wrestling entertainment, right? And folks are yelling at one another, and so and this is modeled.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this is why, again, and it doesn't take many people. Imagine in the final 3 weeks of the election, when everybody will be engaged in one way, shape, or form, and you want to do something, right? Well, sure, you can go online and you can like or retweet or whatever. That's not
Contribute money or whatever.
right. You can do that stuff. You can join a march. You can volunteer. But if you want to be effective, the most effective ways of actually persuading people is to engage with the people you know who have a different perspective or are undecided, and just listen to them. And at that moment when they feel listened to or heard, then you say, here is why I believe what I believe. And after a crescendo of $3 to $4 billion of advertising, that little breath of humanity,
Yeah.
an example of what we would do in the Obama campaign that shows the power of this civic engagement. In 2012, for example, Ohio was a swing state. Republicans had won it for years upon years. We won it in 8, and then we were fighting it again in 12. And so we would have people knock on doors in places like southeastern Ohio who weren't volunteers from different parts of the state. And
They were local.
They were local. And so the mail carrier whom you've known
Right.
for 40 years and you went to high school with, all of a sudden shows up at the door and knocks on it, and the woman opens the door and she sees Jerry, the mail carrier. He's like, I'm here for Barack Obama. And he knows that she doesn't. But the magic there is they have a relationship. They have a respectful relationship, and they can engage in a conversation.
Yeah.
She probably didn't end up voting anyhow.
Right.
But that's the way you begin to restitch that civic fabric, right? Those are the conversations at the door.
And you start by listening to their perspective and be curious.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we're in a time where it feels like, when Obama won his first election, there was this sense of like, hope wins, love wins, right? Like there was this momentum and this feeling. Now it doesn't feel that way, that love always wins, or that hope always wins, or that goodness always wins. And so I'm wondering how you put all that into your mind. Like sometimes anger seems to win. Sometimes like being really mean seems to win, at least on the short term. And so I think we're all kind of grappling with like, all right, what is it? What's my ethos? How can I live in an authentic way? What is it that I can be inspired by? And how do I navigate kind of these times? And that these times are actually have huge lessons for us to learn. I know for me, it's like, I didn't really care what middle America thought. I'm part of the tech world. I'm like, sorry, like stuff's happening. And I've been much more humbled by the fact that there's so many people in the country that don't think the way I think. And so there's definitely lessons, but I wonder how you navigate that terrain. Are you still, but like, yes, love wins, yes, hope wins, or have you kind of recalibrated your own internal messaging about what inspires you or what moves you?
Yeah, for me, Soren, it's something that I learned from the former president. His ability to take the long view and to put even moments that we're in right now in context allows you, even in these moments, to do the work that you need to do, but be measured and focused. So one of the most amazing days of my time in Washington was the day that the Supreme Court ruled on marriage equality. President went into the Rose Garden and he said, essentially I'm paraphrasing, love is love.
Wow.
I went home and I grabbed my wife and my 2 daughters because one of our colleagues had said whether the Supreme Court rules in favor or against, as soon as the sun goes down, we're going to illuminate the White House in rainbow. Win or lose. So on that night, I come back down 16th Street, and there's the White House in rainbow. And I'm there with my 2 daughters and my wife, and there are 10,000 people, men and women and children crying, thinking that they would never, ever, ever see the day that the People's House actually spoke for them.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
That's progress.
Yeah.
And it's progress because, and for me the lesson there is, it didn't happen because of the Supreme Court. Right? It happened because for decades, people in red communities, in blue communities, in purple communities were coming out to their loved ones.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It happened because political leaders were saying this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I can assure you it wasn't just liberals who were coming out.
Right?
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We do this exercise where you sit knee to knee with someone. It's part of our civic engagement training that goes to this sense of progress in seeing people. So Soren, I would tell you my story of why. You would tell me yours.
Yeah.
I would then stand up in front of the room of 30 people and tell your story in the first person. The listening and we adopted this from a group called Narrative 4 that does amazing work on empathetic listening. The listening that's required, and then when you're actually standing up telling someone else's story, it's as if you're holding something so deeply precious. And you keep on looking back at the person to say, did I get that right? And the person whose story is being told, it's like an out-of-body experience to hear your story told.
Wow.
In that moment, when I told the story of a young girl who had come out, 25 years of age, in a deeply religious Mormon community in Utah, who unfortunately, her grandparents, her grandfather had essentially disowned her. Her grandmother, hugged her deeply. As I was telling that story, I started to cry. And the reason I did is I kept on thinking of my grandmother and my grandfather. And we had this shared humanity that transcended everything.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what makes me hopeful is that night, seeing that,
Yeah.
even in this moment,
Right.
speaks to, I think, the very best of the possibility of America, notwithstanding what we're going through right now. Does that make sense?
And that makes sense. And it feels like we're creating conditions. Can we keep creating conditions that create the likelihood of that progress, even if we're not seeing that progress. So I think of it as like the soil. Can we work on the soil, even if the plant that's currently, different plants arise, but if there's good soil in general, we're gonna have some good plants, right? And so that's what I hear you saying, is just like there's things that we can do that create the conditions that play the long game, even if in the short game it doesn't seem like there is the progress that we want to see.
Yeah.
Am I hearing you right? Am I getting you?
So when Chris was talking about Greta,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Or when you think about the Parkland kids,
yeah,
right? The Parkland kids, the power of the Parkland kids wasn't that they adopted a political side. The power was that they were able to go in front of their community and ultimately the world and say, here is what happened to me and here is what I saw.
yeah,
And at that moment, people, a majority of people, Democrat and Republican, saw their children.
yeah,
And in Florida, there was gun legislation that was passed. That is progress. Was it the full agenda? No. So here's the danger. One view is the full agenda wasn't passed. This is a setback. The other side is craven and evil and doesn't care about what happened.
yeah,
Another view is we wish we had done more. We had this important thing that was done. You have now built trust with some of the people in the other party who came together and crafted a piece of work that now you can build on going forward. One approach restores and builds democracy and doesn't turn it into, even in, from my personal perspective, a completely justified policy position of getting that full legislation done.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So what happens now if I simply say, those of you who voted against this are other and evil, and am I persuading them? No. So at the next election, I have every right and I should try to defeat them. When they are reelected, what do I do? Do I stay in that constant electoral, well, I'm going to get you next time? My side, your side? Or do I take some of the progress we made and go back and say, look, I know that this is too much for you. How about this? Right?
That's politics. Yeah. And do you ever feel despair about it all though? I mean, do you ever feel like, man, we were just doing so good, and this turn came, and damn that turn. Like, whoa, that freaking stupid turn. And we'll get it right. I mean, we'll get it right. But that feeling of frustration, which I think those people are feeling, right? Like, what do you do with that frustration? I totally get it. It doesn't help to like put that frustration on the people that we need on our side. And yet the frustration though is totally like understandable, of like heart-wrenching. It's like sometimes me, and it's not just, it's watching the debates can be heart-wrenching to me. But it's heart-wrenching because I want there to be that, and I'm watching myself relate to my partner can be heart-wrenching sometimes too. Like, I wish I was a better person, you know, I wish I could be a better person. I hate seeing people like in division and conflict. And so I definitely also feel like there's a place for the despair.
Of course.
And how do we hold that despair and then move forward from that despair?
Yeah, it's where it becomes disappointment, defeat, despair, anger.
Yeah.
The rise is normal.
Yeah.
Where it becomes toxic is if it now defines the entire way that you view your citizenship.
Right.
Soren, when I say citizenship, I'm not talking about the paper.
Right.
Because I know plenty of people who don't have the paper, who exhibit the very best qualities of citizenship.
Absolutely.
And the opposite.
Yeah.
What I mean by citizenship is that notion that, like it or not, I have a stake in you, you have a stake in me. You're going to make me really angry sometimes. You're going to make me angry about these 4 things, but there are these 2 things that we can work on. Here's something that will blow your mind. The Koch brothers, in the second term of the Obama presidency, were our best allies on criminal justice reform.
Wow. The biggest supporters of the Republican Party, or some of the biggest supporters. Wow.
And I remember vividly the discussion around, once there was the initial call from them, that there were some structural reforms around, from a libertarian perspective, but whatever the perspective is, the outcome is what you're focused on.
Right.
Right? Not the motives and what's bringing you there. And whether or not we should engage, of course you should engage. Because if it means that for mostly young men and boys of color throughout the United States that have been over-incarcerated, that this will change the trajectory in lives if they are a partner, good.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
You can imagine a scenario where the reaction would have been different.
You're either with us or you're against us, and if you're against us on these other issues, yeah.
So what potential then to build coalitions, understanding that, look, there are scenarios right now, and I'm sure folks are like clicking on 538 and on Real Clear Politics all the time. And there are scenarios where on the day of the election this year, the Electoral College will be 269 to 269. If that happens, the election goes to the House of Representatives to elect the President of the United States.
Okay, some people are happy about that.
So here's one wrinkle for those of you who applauded. It isn't everybody gets to vote. It's each state gets 1 vote.
Whoa.
And so today there are 26 states where the majority is Republican. Right?
Yeah.
The reason I'm raising this, besides the effect it's having,
Yeah.
is we are an evenly divided
Yeah.
nation. When you just step back for a second and you think that, well, if I win this election,
Yeah.
this is going to change without doing the work of building community that involves people who fundamentally disagree with you day after day after day. It's vote, volunteer, engage, fight for what you believe in, and then when it's over, go back into your community and understand that if there's a park that needs to be cleaned, don't wait for the elected official to do it. You and your neighbors can do it.
Republican or Democrat.
Right? I'm not going to ask you for your card. Right? When I'm worshiping, I am not going to ask you. I see a human. When you go, my wife had some difficult health issues. Over the past 2 years, she's, as you know, fine now.
Yeah.
When we would go into the emergency room, I didn't care one bit if the attending physician was a conservative Republican who voted for this person or that person. Or the nurse who cared for the person I love most in the world didn't agree with my ideology. Right?
Yeah.
This is... The United States of America is, as opposed to most nations on the planet, a nation that's based upon a creed. We, the people, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. That's like our North Star. That's the thing that brought my immigrant parents from Portugal and that brought so many people here. It isn't the distinction between left and right. We're all viewing it differently. But essentially, these are the first principles that's important, not for the politicians to model, for us to model.
Yeah.
Because in many ways, they are symptoms and a reflection of the body politic.
That's great.
And that's our responsibility.
That's great. So we have the wrap-up sign, David. Is that how you want to? Is there anything else you want to end with, or does that feel good? If you kind of tune into your heart right now, is there anything else that wants to be said?
I just want to. I want to thank you deeply for not just what you do, but for the community that you and the team at Wisdom have built.
This is
It is a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Thank you. David Simas, everybody.